time, I'd just like to really reiterate for members of the gallery, not that your applause or comment is not appreciated, but it is certainly not allowed in the precincts of the Parliament, as you are not a part of the debate. So respectfully, I ask that you restrain yourselves. And secondly, honorable members, may I remind you of the conditions within which you are allowed to make your submissions today. The time limit is enforced, so please ensure that you conduct yourselves accordingly as many. The chair recognizes the honorable member for the Bahamas Department of Customs.
Mr. Speaker, as I was saying before we broke for lunch, there must be more to it than the song that was penned by popular Bahamian artist KB and Sting, where there seems to be a culture of inherent slackness that is allowed to permeate and infect the entire organism, but rather one that espouses the idea that we all taught growing up, that if you work hard and are committed, then you will be able to achieve meaningful success in this life. This should be indicative of a return to the cultural roots of this proud people who pride themselves on their work ethic, not only in the public service, but in the country as a whole. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, one needs to commend the patriots who have decided that they are willing to serve their country, accepting that it is for love of country, as the state undoubtedly will not be able to match the office in the private sector. This, however, does not by any way mean that these persons should be excluded from experiencing the Bahamian dream because they are not given what is considered a fair living wage, given the sacrifices made for the betterment and love of country. Because, Mr. Speaker, as the colloquial expression goes, when pressure tall, pressure tall. It is these hard-working and dedicated persons who enable the government to enforce the social contract that was spoken of by John Locke, in which persons of the wider community agree to give up some of their basic human rights as defined by Thomas Hobbes in favor of what is best for the collective. In order to successfully maintain this contract, there must be a continuous effort to review the basic principles on which the grand bargain was struck and ensure that despite changing times, there is no deviation from the original agreement. In living up to this, there must be an ongoing process in which procedures are constantly reviewed with an eye toward efficiency and best practices that can be parlayed into a much wider movement in the nation, whereby through the elimination of antiquated procedures in favor of ones that better suit the current environment, that there can be a wider push in the country to delve into the endless possibilities that exist in the growing digital field. When he commissioned the new Public Service Modernization Unit, Prime Minister Dr. the Most Honorable Hubert Minnis stated that there will be a policy where new hires will be required to be tech savvy so that they will be able to function in his vision of a paperless government. This is indeed a positive step in the right direction and is mirrored in the modernization of many areas in the service, inclusive of Bahamas Customs and Excise Department. The department, Mr. Speaker, is in preparation of launching its new single-window platform, which will eliminate the need for persons having to visit numerous agencies to gain the requisite approvals needed to conduct business with the department. This will also lead to the reduction in the amount of physical paper that needs to be filled out, which can be seen as a daunting task and a barrier to trade, as it can result in the loss of valuable manpower hours filling them out and checking to ensure that they're properly filled out. This can result in increased productivity, as it calls for less manpower hours to be used in manual examinations, which both the IDB and the IMF have both noted yielded negligible results. This move comes as there is considerable push to increase the ease of doing business in the country, in hopes that by doing so, it will create opportunities for the public at large to become better owners of our collective destiny as a country as we continue to chart our course. This is in keeping with other small island states and emerging markets who have used public sector reform programs as a way to jumpstart periods of unprecedented growth in their economies, much to the benefit of their countrymen. Mr. Speaker, these persons employed in the public service are the embodiment of the statement that was made by former U.S. President John F. Kennedy when he says, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. Mr. Speaker, in order for change to happen, it must be focused, it must be targeted, and it must be deliberate. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many, the Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for the Ministry of National Security.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, colleagues. I am representing the Ministry of National Security. It is my profound privilege to make contribution on the proposed resolution how change in the public service can ignite change in our nation. It is my opinion that the public service is at a crossroads with respect to service-wide aging of senior officers and a gaping hole of middle-rank officers. The public service touches all facets of the Bahamian society through various services on a daily basis, such as security, education, judicial, health, to name a few. It is very difficult, but not impossible, attracting and retaining young, qualified officers and professionals to be engaged in the public sector, and to favorably consider this avenue as a dream career, as it is noticeable that the public service, if it has not already entered, is at the level of entering a period of growth in efficiency. To encourage or entice highly educated, trained, and skilled persons to remain in the employment of the public service of the Bahamas, as opposed to migrating to the private sector or foreign countries, salaries, promotions should be made more attractive than it is currently. Better salaries, timely promotions, and other rewards for dedication and hard work will help motivate public officers to perform beyond the call of duty, be more responsive to the demands for timely delivery of government services, and reduce the risk of corruption in the public service, causing the general public to be satisfied nationwide. In addition to these challenges, the demands for services are increasing at an alarming rate. And though the insistence on privatization and public-private partnerships in a developing country as the Bahamas, the need for government to step in as a backstop is still a predominant action that has to be undertaken. This sets up a perfect storm for state dislocation as health, education, law enforcement, and the judicial service will suffer, contributing to a vicious cycle of dysfunction, poverty, and crime. It is commendable, however, that the public service is considering, if not implemented as yet, some of its employees to spend a short stint in the private sector to gain experience as it relates to excellent work ethics. The public service will have to reform to meet and avert these challenges. The days of dedicated professional civil servants, like some of us here in this honorable house, devoting our entire career era in the public service, are quickly dissolving. After this decade of seasoned and effective public officers, it is unlikely that we will see any person spending 30 to 40 plus years in the public service in the near future. Non-functional, disrespectful existing officers will no longer be tolerated in the public service. Therefore, training and retraining with motivational seminars must be a constant part of the formula or equation for sustainability of vibrant, intelligent, self-motivated, dedicated, cheerful persons to ensure that employees are fully equipped with tools academically, mentally, socially, and physically with positive attitudes for future generations, showcasing the public service and causing it to become the envy of the entire workforce within our country. Identification of the talents of our young people must be a priority. These young people must be groomed to flourish to their utmost potential. As for far too long, concentration has been primarily on academics, whereas vocational skills have not, over the years, been justly addressed. Only recently, there has been some recognition and is currently developing the lacking and vast potential this avenue of education will have to positively impact the economic welfare of people in the Bahamas for years to come. Therefore, emphasis is being redirected to encourage the future generation of leaders to take advantage of scholarships and other benefits to attend local institutions like BTVI and BAMSI to flourish students' capabilities and development. Let us now focus on another area of concern, that is the work in progress. The sporting arena in all disciplines is currently taking its place in the countrywide progress. It is commendable that the Bahamas is now competing with its counterparts in the region and in many instances, the world. There needs to be increased well-equipped facilities and financial support nationwide to enhance Bahamian athletes and sporting organizations. Because of this initiative, corporate entities and private individuals are also partnering more so with various organized groups. Regarding the financial burden, the government's pension plan is another factor that will cause government to reassess the conditions of employment for civil servants, even though at present it is being implemented at a limited degree. There will definitely be a move towards contractual employment even more, eliminating the recruitment of the generalists and instead surgically hiring for persons with specific skills and talents for specific tasks. I want you to know now a major challenge will be the recruitment of quantitative, analytical, and computer skills to function in the new and emerging environment. A key change will be operating in a freedom of information environment, which will provide a check on ministerial overreach. This newfound requirement for openness and transparency will require a new attitude from all public officers, as well as cabinet ministers and the wider political arena. The other challenge will be numeration, not only money, but other benefits. As young people become more health conscious, the demands for improved working conditions will definitely increase. Healthcare, insurance, and fair play will be the watchwords for progress within the general public services workplace as they render quality and caring services to people generally, no matter the circumstance. Therefore, the public service is surely at a crossroads, and those public officers who remain in this changing atmosphere must adapt to change with a positive attitude, increased respect for each other, productivity, dedication, and efficiency, as the norm will not be the order of the day any longer, nor tolerated. Change in the public service can ignite change in our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Thank you, Honorable Member. As many. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for the office of the Governor General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, my fellow parliamentarians and members of the Honorable House. I wish to convey my sincere gratitude to the executive branch of government and the organizers of the 18th Annual Public Service Week of activities for recognizing the many public officers who would have made endless contributions to the continual development of our nation. I take this opportunity to say thank you. Mr. Speaker, I would also like to thank Her Excellency, the Governor General, Madam Speaker, and staff of the Office of the Governor General for supporting me as I embrace this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to stand in the halls of Parliament as a participant in this year's Public Service Week of activities, in particular, the mock Parliament session. Mr. Speaker, I too support the theme that change in the public service can in fact ignite change in our nation. As we all will agree, the public serves as a mirror of our society, notwithstanding the fact that we all live and come from different parts of the country, and that we may also have different ethnic backgrounds. However, we came together and bring with us our beliefs, morals, and experiences. We became the fabric that formed the public service. Mr. Speaker, as a young professional of 6 years of service in the public service, I have had many opportunities to speak and listen to my colleagues of my generation. Many of them are disillusioned by the work ethics of our leaders and by extension, our colleagues within our institutions. In preparation for today's session, I was forced to think out of my comfort zone, out of the box, so to speak, to look a little deeper into the public service, a place that I call home away from home. The main question that came to mind was, am I satisfied with my work? Is there any way that I can find satisfaction in a job that oftentimes seems to not be going anywhere? Am I overworked and underappreciated? Have I been prepared for the job that I am required to do? Am I evaluated fairly? Where do I see myself in 10 years? Are there training opportunities to help me to succeed? Is there anyone that I can talk to? Will they listen? Or do I care too much or not enough? These remain troubling thoughts. But today, Mr. Speaker, I invite my fellow parliamentarians, as we have been challenged to assess our current situation, to think carefully about why are you satisfied or not satisfied with our current system. Review the working hours, policies, pay, benefits, relationship with supervisors. Are we being empowered to use our skills? Are we receiving the recognition, respect? Do we really know the service or only the area that we have been assigned? Or is it all about job security? You see, Mr. Speaker, we, the Millennium Group of the public servants, are the fabric that will ignite change in our nation. We will become the future leaders in 10 to 15 years. In a few years, Mr. Speaker, the public service will have a new face in terms of leadership. Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask every senior officer in charge of a department that if you were to be absent from your duties just for one day, can your second in command or your junior staff carry on the duties of the department efficiently? Or would they have to keep calling you in desperate need of knowing what to do? Are we prepared? Are we ready? In the words of the late Dr. Miles Monroe, as he addressed the issue of true leadership, he wrote, I quote, "It is a true tragedy to see one's generation work destroyed, ignored, or devalued by the ones that followed," end quote. We should invest in people more than buildings to prepare for our succession and mentor our future leaders. We have got to preserve our heritage, and we can, with an aggressive approach for true leadership and succession planning in our public service. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I wish to say to my fellow parliamentarians, encourage our public officers to not give up hope, but continue to provide service. Be the best in whatever position that you serve. Invest in your personal development. Take ownership of your career, and the rest will follow. Do not ask what your country can do for you, but what can I do for my country? Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, again, I say thank you for this opportunity, and with God's help, I will do my best to ignite that change that will have positive impact in our nation. Thank you, and may God bless each and every one of you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. At this time, I'd like to recognize in the gallery the Honorable Ellsworth Johnson, Member of Parliament for Yamakura and Minister of State in the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs. Thank you for joining us. As many, the Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for the Port Department.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A pleasant good afternoon to all of my colleagues here in this honorable House. I am proud to stand on behalf of the great working people at the Port Department today. And I do support the resolution, a change in the public service can ignite change in our nation. Mr. Speaker, as a child, I always loved Star Trek. And I was
ourselves that participate in public service reform. Some of them are South Africa, St. Lucia, Seychelles, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago speaks to policy reforms, strategies and methodologies deployed to support national priorities, especially through greater policy comprehension and for sustained development and growth. Let us look at one of those vexing problems that we used to face. It was so frustrating to go to the passport office to get your passport. But in 2010, the then F&M government implemented a new process along with e-passport. Online application became a reality. The public can sit at any computer, anywhere in the Commonwealth of Bahamas, and with one finger, they can fill out an application. And now, with smartphones, everybody can do it at anywhere and at any time. Even my Grammy. According to Mr. Wade Watson, the then Deputy National Coordinator for Information and Technology at the Ministry of Finance, said, and I quote, "The system was developed as a solution to the long lines from early in the morning hours outside the passport office on Thompson Boulevard. This would give them an opportunity to make application for e-passport and have it dealt with expeditiously, giving them also the facility to make appointments, similar to the U.S. Embassy." End quote. My point, Mr. Speaker, those persons who implement that program were public servants. Meaning challenges right dead in the eye, sitting down, formulating a policy, and making it work. And today, many of us are benefiting from e-passport online service. In July 2018, the Honorable Dr. Hubert Minnis, Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, launched e-government, creating a web portal for us to use to deal with essential services, basically to pay our bills. With the stroke of a finger, we can now fill out applications for business, new business, renewal, and we can pay online. Licenses, vendors, government vendors who spend hours, days running down by the Treasury to check to see if their checks were ready, can now go on the computer and find out whether checks are ready. and eliminate all of that frustration. A tremendous benefit to the Bahamian people. It has made life so easy. Mr. Speaker, my fellow colleagues, let us look at my department, the judiciary, the court system, as we would refer to locally. We have started using our video link program. This has caused us to reduce all of those unnecessary adjournments. We can now receive, see, and listen to witnesses giving evidence anywhere in the world. We can now have counsel from London, QCs, conducting trials while they are still in London. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, we no longer have to bust down hundreds of inmates for arraignment. We are now video linking arraignments. Cost effective, time saved. Ladies and gentlemen, the change is already here. The Judicial Department is well on its way with automation of the courts. We are in the process of digitalizing all of the court's records, all of the processes. Easier for you to get transcripts. We are digitalizing our bail system so that we're able to keep a track of persons with ankle monitors, persons who are supposed to sign in to various stations. We can track them. We can assist the police as we work together. Ladies and gentlemen, the future for the judiciary is that we become paperless. No longer would you need to bring bundles of documents to the court, lawyers falling over their briefs. They just need to come with their smartphone and computer. That's the future of the judiciary. That's the change that is coming, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, the judiciary, if not any other ministry, will continue to set the pace. We are going to continue with training. We are going to improve on every aspect of our ministry. Customer service is key. We will treat everybody with the same measuring stick. And I am here to support this resolution. And I agree with all my colleagues that spoke before that change civil service will ignite change in our nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for the Department of Statistics.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to share my views. I represent the Department of Statistics, but I feel like I truly represent all of you, the public service. First of all, I'd like to say that I am grateful that we have a functional parliament, government, and public service. For without one, our country would be in chaos, as I've observed from other countries who lack these organized government structures. A good government is necessary, for without one, anarchy would reign. So I give thanks and praise to all of our members of parliament, the cabinet, the Senate, the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judiciary, and the whole public service as a whole. Thank you for your service. But while I do believe that our government and public service do great work in all of its different departments, positive change is still necessary within for the forward advancement of our country. The change is inevitable. Change is the law of the universe. But growth, advancement, upward movement is intentional. It must be done intentionally. Change in the public service can absolutely ignite change in our nation, especially considering the fact that the public service is the largest employer within our nation of approximately 20,000 employees. As some of our previous speakers have identified, there are many changes and many tweaks that can be made to improve the functionality, the effectiveness, and the efficiency of the public service that will impact our country. I will identify a few that I have observed, which happens to be piggybacking on some of the previous ideas suggested. The main goal of my suggestions for the public service is to foster the creation of trust within the public service as a whole, and trust towards the public service itself from the public. The thing is, at different levels within the public service, trust has been violated. It has been violated between upper management against the line staff, line staff against upper management, staff against each other at different levels, the individual against the system itself at different levels outside of the public service. Trust has been violated. For some of the public, they feel less trust now. Trust is necessary for building a better public service, or in fact, any organization for that matter. So it doesn't just apply to the public service. See, trust allows people to take risks, knowing that their values, their rights, their beliefs, and their safety, both mentally, spiritually, and physically, will not be violated by another human being. And it is those risks, Mr. Speaker, that take humanity forward. I propose, Mr. Speaker, that when trust is built, people will take those risks. They will go further. They will move the public service forward, which will result in a forward movement of the country. Trust is what creates unity. When trust is breached, segregation occurs, separation occurs. And when that occurs, morale drops. When morale drops, people become negative, they become disgruntled, and they won't treat the citizens whom they serve, or they won't treat each other, for that matter, their co-workers, with the professionalism, a positive attitude. And the citizens will have a negative experience with the public service. And it's the accumulation of all those negative experiences over time which creates a negative perception towards the public service. And over time, morale drops. When the national morale drops, people lose hope and faith in the government and eventually for their country. And unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, when faith is lost for their country, people want to leave and never come back. Henceforth, the brain drain effect, as some have mentioned before. So, Mr. Speaker, imagine a public service with a positive culture filled with trust and unity. Imagine how each of those 20,000 people would take such a positive culture and perpetuate it off hours within their families, within their churches, within each of their organizations that they are a part of. Imagine what a positive ripple effect that would have throughout the nation. It would spread throughout the country like yeast would spread throughout dough. 20,000 people, Mr. Speaker, is a large number for a small country. 20,000 people, 20,000 happy, positive, unified people is a true force to be reckoned with and not to be taken lightly. Happy employees will treat each other happily. Happy employees will treat the public whom they serve happy with better service. And they'll treat each other the same way. Establishing trust, Mr. Speaker, comes in the form of creating a whole new culture within the public service, as many have previously mentioned. A description of this culture in a sentence would be one of professionalism, consistency, honesty, integrity, accountability, being good for your word, one of classiness, one of moral ethics, as mentioned in the by also self-discipline, which is mentioned in the preamble of our Constitution, by the way. Treating people both within the public service, within and without, with love and respect, because people are human beings made in the image and likeness of God. They are not pawns and they are not puppets to be used and manipulated and tossed aside, Mr. Speaker. How about a culture of speaking positively behind people's back instead of negatively? How about a culture of proper moral conduct? Right? one where people do what they say they're going to do. Especially considering the fact that our founding fathers based the whole structure on Christian principles as identified in the preamble of our Constitution. See, as I mentioned, with a trust-filled environment, we'll have unity and it'll create happy employees. So firstly, Mr. Speaker, establishing a good culture comes in the form of hiring and employing trustworthy people who have the mindset and the character of the culture desired to create. See, nowadays, in the public service and in the private sector and all throughout, people are hired only on the basis of skills, but they are fired for bad character. A better process, I propose, would be created for vetting and hiring people who not only have the skills, but also have the character, good moral ethics, good work habits, and proper people and proper communication skills will solve this issue. Furthermore, as some have mentioned earlier, I would suggest that training programs be created for officers already employed in the public service to educate them on the principles that will create this type of culture. Topics would include proper office etiquette, proper people skills, relating with people in a harmonious manner, motivation, leadership skills, communication skills. These are skills that you don't learn in school, Mr. Speaker. There's no school, our education system does not teach this. But it's necessary. Proper moral ethics, self-discipline, proper dress code are all essential to create a safe, unified environment for officers of the public for which to thrive. I have seen courses on technical skills being offered, but not skills that address one's mindset and paradigm. See, Mr. Speaker, yes, this would be an investment within the staff. Yes, this is an investment in people, but investing in people is always an excellent idea because the country is the people. The people is what make up the country. This form of investment will yield returns not just for a week or just for a month or even just for a year, but for multiple generations to come, hundreds of years, far beyond what your eye can see. Secondly, I propose discretion is necessary in hiring public service personnel. See, it is common for people to be hired because of who they know. Whether it's from religious affiliations, whether it's from past educational organizations, or whether it's because of political affiliations.
My Lord.
Now, to some degree, this is fine because networking is an important element. Humans are naturally more trustworthy of someone whom they know and feel comfortable with. This is as old as humanity itself. However, the problem arises when unqualified people who lack moral skills, who lack the people skills, who lack the work ethic and good character are put in wrong positions just because of someone they know. Hiring the wrong people for the wrong positions slows down the efficiency of the whole system.
Yes.
You see, Mr. Speaker, as some have mentioned or touched on earlier, in order to hire and to attract and retain the sharp, qualified people with good character and good skills, positions must be made attractive. It must be made worth their while. The public service pay scale is notoriously lower than the private sector. And given a choice between a career in the public service and one in the private sector, people of this caliber would naturally, given the opportunity, gravitate towards that with the largest return of the investment of time. I suggest, Mr. Speaker, that you raise the pay scale while simultaneously raising the standards of the position. See, the private sector pays more because they tolerate less slackness and they adhere to higher standards ingrained in their culture. The public service must also adhere to higher standards to rise to a higher state for these changes to occur. Is this an investment? Yes. It's an investment of people, but an investment that yields returns for multiple generations to come. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, I have observed that the public service experiences huge lags in accounts payables. It is common that it takes approximately, in some cases, 6 months for some contractors to be paid from services offered to the public service, as well as some who have worked overtime. Sometimes it may take longer. This should not be, Mr. Speaker. Furthermore, it was even brought to my attention that some organizations, I'm not going to mention, within the public service have hired officers, but they were not paid for months. For months. Is this really fulfilling one's obligations in a timely fashion, as mentioned in the resolution, Mr. Speaker? That's a solution to set a deadline so when the government can pay and honor the deadline dates. This feeds into creating trust, Mr. Speaker. I believe that because the government has these highly trained and educated people and highly skilled people employed in the public service, they can certainly catch up with these payments. In addition, I would argue that with this being timely, sometimes promises have been made to make contractual workers full-time, permanent, and pensionable. If people were promised to be made permanent and pensionable by a certain date and a certain time, the promise should be honored. The issue is not whether someone should be made permanent and pensionable. That's not the issue. The issue is the promise made to them that remains perpetually unfulfilled. This is just a really simple solution. Honor the promises you make. If a promise cannot be honored, then don't make such promises in the first place. Many experts in human relations and business branding would say it is better to under-promise and over-deliver. However, what's been observed is that people have been over-promised and under-delivered. When people's expectations are exceeded, they're left with a positive impression, and it creates trust, creates a brand name. When people's expectations are not met and left below their standards, they are left with a negative impression, and it destroys trust. Now, while some of my suggestions, Mr. Speaker, may not seem outwardly sensational or sometimes may not be glaringly obvious, they do lie beneath the surface and cause problems from within, which will eventually create a problem without. They resemble an internal rust, unseen to the untrained eye, but yet it is corroding, weakening, and jeopardizing the structural integrity from within. And left unchecked, the structure can fall. So in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, let us build a better culture and better perception of the public service. Let us make the public service a shining beacon for the nation to be illuminated by. For I believe that change within the public service will ignite change within the nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. It's a matter of trust. As many. The Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for the Ministry of Agriculture and Marine Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and honorable members, I am humbled and honored to have been chosen by my ministry, the Ministry of Agriculture and Marine Resources, my minister, the Honorable Michael Pintard, and my dynamic permanent secretary, Ms. Pedro Raman, and the very fine, hard-working, dedicated, dependable, committed, and loyal officers within our ministry. Within the Ministry of Agriculture and Marine Resources, we have a number of agencies, departments, and units, which include the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Marine Resources, the Bahamas Agricultural Marine Science Institute, better known as BAMSI, the Bahamas Health, Agricultural Food Safety Authority, better known as BASTA, the Bahamas, or the Department of Cooperative Development, the ministry itself, and the various units, including the land unit. Now, Mr. Speaker and honorable members, I have a very simple task. My task is simply this. Mr. Speaker, I adopt all of my honorable members' speeches that came before me. But I know, Mr. Speaker, you would not let me go off so lightly. Mr. Speaker and honorable members of this, change in the public service can indeed ignite a change in our nation. The public service, Mr. Speaker, represents the largest employer in our nation and provides citizens with the vital services necessary in a modern economy. In my opinion, Mr. Speaker, that public service serves as a vital training ground for young people in our society and provides the necessary ingredients needed for individuals to advance, develop, and mature. The public service in the Bahamian context, Mr. Speaker, provides the necessary and vital services to our people in order for them to survive and grow. Mr. Speaker and honorable members, we must be the change we would like to see in the public service, which will transform and ignite a change in our society. The advancement of any public service, Mr. Speaker, initiate and is evidenced through an efficient and an ever advancement of the method of how government ensures that its citizens' lives are empowered, improved through the various arms of the public service. Throughout the years, Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas government have made a number of important and transformational steps to modernize the public service. For example, the government have ensured that a number of the government services can be completed by a click of a mouse, by the use of our handheld devices, moving towards what we consider, Mr. Speaker, e-government. This indeed is an example of igniting a positive change for the future generations, because you are aware, Mr. Speaker, and we will all agree that today's generation are indeed more computer literate. Mr. Speaker, in the Ministry of Agriculture and Marine Resources, we will be seeking to bring what we consider producers, farmers, and fishermen, what we consider in the same room as investors. And on the same hand, Mr. Speaker, our ministry will be seeking in not too distant future to bring together what we call farmers, fishermen in the same room as buyers, to create what we consider a level playing field, and to ensure that government provides the necessary framework to cause businesses to thrive. What do I mean by that, Mr. Speaker? Gone will be the days where government are in competition with farmers. Gone are the days when government will be in competition with fishermen, Mr. Speaker. The government, Mr. Speaker, should always be in the business of building relationships, partnerships, in order to improve the lives of its citizens. This initiative, Mr. Speaker, represents a change in the way the public service, in particular our ministry, operates. Mr. Speaker, our ministry is the leading industry in the public service. I want you to listen carefully. Mr. Speaker and honorable members, our ministry, that is the Ministry of Agriculture and Marine Resources, is the leading industry in the public service when we consider the role we play in food security in our country. Our ministry, Mr. Speaker, bears the responsibility for the production, consumption, and the importation of food and food products in our country. In particular, Mr. Speaker, I mentioned earlier, and members of this honorable place, our ministry has the responsibility for the newly formed Bahamas Agricultural Health Food and Safety Authority, BAFTA, which brings together all of the animal, plant, food agencies, as well as phytosanitary measures. This initiative is an example of change in the public service, which will foster a change in our nation as it relates, Mr. Speaker, to food security. Our ministry, Mr. Speaker, also launched in 2013 or thereabout, and we are still encouraging the growth and the development of the Bahamas Agricultural Marine Science Institute, BAMSI, which was a bold initiative. This agency has a three-pronged approach. The School of BAMSI itself, the research farm, the Marine Resources section, and the Associated Farmers Program. The honorable member from Lands and Survey mentioned in his contribution that he is of a particular age, and the next age of persons involved in the, what we say, surveying is about 60, 65. But Mr. Speaker and honorable members, the average age of a farmer in the Bahamas is over the age of 60. And we want to encourage Bahamians, whether you are in Nassau, Grand Bahama, Eleuthera, Andros, to take advantage of the opportunities that we are providing to our citizenry to get them involved within the Agricultural and the Marine Science Institute. Mr. Speaker and honorable members, this is a bold initiative which will create change in our nation, and we, as I've said earlier, encourage younger Bahamians to again consider a career in the agriculture and marine industry, and to help to reduce our dependency, Mr. Speaker, on the importation of food. Mr. Speaker and honorable members, we as a country, we import over $1 billion worth of food every year in this country. Imagine, Mr. Speaker, if we were to be able to put a dent in that food bill. Imagine if we were able to create and cause a number of younger Bahamians to get involved in the farming industry, in the marine industry. Gone are the days, Mr. Speaker, where the hard work of farming or the agricultural industry. The agricultural industry today, Mr. Speaker, is indeed technological and provide technological improvements to ensure that they yield their harvest, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I turn to the Department of Cooperative Development, where what I've spent almost 18 years of my public service life. Department of Cooperative Development was established in 1974 by an act of this Parliament. And cooperatives in the Bahamas are thriving, Mr. Speaker. Over 40,000 Bahamians are involved in the cooperative sector. We who are members of a cooperative, Mr. Speaker, have amassed some $400 million to date, Mr. Speaker. The very simplest definition of a cooperative, Mr. Speaker, is people helping people to help themselves. So we want to get Bahamians involved in the cooperative sector. Yes, Mr. Speaker, that statistic sounds great. However, Mr. Speaker, if you allow me just a half a more second, that sounds great, Mr. Speaker. But when we look at our brothers and sisters in this hemisphere, if we go to the island of Dominica, which has less than 100,000 Dominicans, 95% of every Dominicans are a member of a cooperative. If we go to the island of Barbados or the country of Barbados, 65% of every Bajans are a member of a cooperative. If we go to Jamaica, or even down to the island of Hispaniola, in the country of Haiti, 33% of every Haitian is a member of a cooperative. When we look at the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, less than 12% of our population are members of the cooperative. Nice. We want to send a clarion call to Bahamians to get involved in cooperative to ensure that their future remains bright and prosperous, Mr. Future. Mr. Speaker,
Thank you, honorable member. Thank you, honorable member.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your cooperation. As many. The chair recognizes the honorable member for the Department of Labor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know how I could go after that. Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to rise on behalf of the hard-working and dedicated employees of the Department of Labor to contribute to this first annual public service mock parliament under the theme, Change in the Public Service Can Ignite Change in Our Nation. Mr. Speaker, the captain charting our cause is none other than Senator the Honorable Dion A. Folks, Minister of Labor, with his co-captains, Mr. Celia Strawn, Permanent Secretary, and Mr. John A. Pinder, Acting Director of Labor. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Labor plays a significant role in promoting harmonious industrial relations between both employer and employees while providing avenues for high-level employment. This agency is tasked with three main responsibilities: industrial relations, the Public Employment Services Unit, and the Occupational Health and Safety Unit. I am pleased to advise this House that the department has initiated the process of modernization. The launch of its One-Stop Services Initiative is another part of this government's overall commitment to ensuring that every Bahamian and legal resident has access to services rendered by this department. The One-Stop Services offer a range of services which include the following: the processing of the National Insurance and Social Services unemployment benefits, with the primary focus of connecting unemployed applicants with employment. Also, resume writing and various types of on-the-job training. Access to computer and internet services for both employer and employees. And finally, provides access to available job vacancies. Mr. Speaker, in January 2018, the department launched its new initiative dubbed Labor on the Blocks. This new initiative is successfully answering the need of job seekers as well as employers, because, Mr. Speaker, no longer are we sitting behind our desks. We brought the office outdoors and meeting prospective job seekers in their various communities. Mr. Speaker, they didn't have to drive around in a jitney. They didn't have to drive around wasting their gas. Mr. Speaker, we brought employers at their fingertips. I wish to also advise that last week, Thursday, we also held a labor on the blocks at the Department of Corrections, which will greatly impact inmates about to be released. Mr. Speaker, so once again, you see, no matter where you are, the Department of Labor will come and bring our services to you, even if you're locked away. Mr. Speaker, based on statistical data, this project is reaping its benefits with hundreds of persons being gainfully employed. I would like to commend the Minister of Labor and the team of the Public Employment Services Division. Mr. Speaker, it took creativity and a new vision in the way the department operates to make a change in the lives of so many individuals. So, Mr. Speaker, the Department of Labor is on the move. Mr. Speaker, on a daily basis, the general public laments that our services and work ethics are substandard and leaves much to be desired. With this in mind, we must not pretend that our operations are perfect and without its challenges. However, we must celebrate the good and we must continue to tackle the bad. Ministries and departments for years have been underfunded due to the economic constraints which successive governments have been faced with since 2008. Colleagues, let us also admit that the policies and system are archaic and do not lend to the notion of change. The human resources capacity must be reorganized to effectively carry out our mandates. Mr. Speaker, today I did not only come to voice some frustrations many officers face on a daily basis, but to offer a workable solution to enable us to be heard. The Bahamas government is the largest employer in the country with some 20,000 plus employees. We recognize that there are so many pressing priorities for the Bahamas government. For example, upgrades to our decaying hospitals and clinics, a prison that is vastly overcrowded and without modern amenities, the need for new government-owned facilities so that we can reduce the millions of wastage spent every year on rent. Nevertheless, substantial sums need to be allocated each year for training of our public officers. We are the ones who provide the majority of public goods and services. There should be constant training and upgraded annually so that public servants can offer the best service possible at all times. Unfortunately, the Ministry and Department of Labor combined only have $12,000 budgeted for tuition, training, and in-service awards. So, Mr. Speaker, once again, you see $12,000 is not enough for over 500 employees. How much more could we offer if the majority of our staff were properly qualified and certified? I wish to recommend to the powers that be, the Honorable Member for the Public Service, that we establish a mechanism for employees, regardless of their geographical location, to advance recommendations for the further modernization of the public service. It's no secret that many officers on a daily basis perform duties that are well above their substantive posts, and they must be rewarded in some tangible way. Mr. Speaker, these are only but a few suggestions on the way forward. However, I wish to advise the general public that the department is taking the necessary steps to correct our inefficiencies in both our industrial relations unit and our occupational health and safety unit. Additionally, I wish to advise that in the not too distant future, the department will be launching its public awareness campaign on the services offered by our agencies. So, Mr. Speaker, in the not too distant future, you will know, the public will know, they have 2 weeks vacation every year. Mr. Speaker, the public will know that they will have all benefits offered to them by the law. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I remind officers of a quote I heard recently by an unknown author, and it says, "Life favors the prepared. Opportunities come sometimes but once." We are working in a constantly changing environment, and we must be ready to embrace change regardless of the status quo. So, Mr. Speaker, even if our appraisals are not done on time, we will remain focused. Mr. Speaker, even if the service-wide promotions aren't done on time, we will remain focused. Mr. Speaker, we need these things in order to progress. I am of the firm belief that once we invest in the necessary infrastructure and personal development of human resources, not only will we affect change from within the public service, but across the nation as a whole. So, Mr. Speaker, the Department of Labor supports this resolution and offers its recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, honorable members. Honorable member, at this time we'd like to recognize in the gallery the Honorable Bransel Roll, Minister of State for the Public Service and National Insurance. Let's welcome him, please. I'm so sorry, the Minister. Look how I can get in trouble with the moon. Boss man, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon, please don't hold back my increment. As many. The chair recognizes the honorable member for the Department of Environmental Health Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Okay, let me be swift, even though the honorable member of public service, I don't know what time to be straight. But, all right.
I ain't judging here.
But I would like to thank the committee, National Public Service Week, that actually gave the average employee a chance to speak in this humble and honorable house. You know, equality is really ringing out here today. So, truly all men are equal in the eyes of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. As a post-slavery and colonized nation, we should never let our laws abuse our liberty earned by our forefathers, nor should we allow liberating laws to be ignored and inflict oppression on our free people. Democracy is a cry for the people to be heard and represented by a chosen voice on the people's behalf. When I say people, I mean all people in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. That includes the doctor, the lawyer, Indian chief, CEO, janitor, garbage collector, gardener, pastor, and criminal. God reigns on the just and unjust alike. We in His image do the same. There is no who you know or what you know, as we all know God, the all-faithful Father, the only judge of us all. I speak to you on matters of the civil service from my vantage point at the Department of Environmental Health Services. And at this time, on behalf of my colleagues, I would have to state that the department's mandate is much more than spraying mosquitoes, passing out rat poison, removing derelict cars, and collecting garbage. Our independence has granted us self-governance to better the life of Bahamians for the future. To aid this successful self-governance, we created infrastructures equipped with a workforce, civil servants. Being a Christian nation, it is a joy to speak the word. He who wants to be leader of all must first be servant to all. No matter your post in the service, you are here to serve all of this nation. To serve all in this current climate requires reform in the civil service. It is written that it is better to cut off the hand that offends thee rather than allow it to condemn the whole body to destruction. Allow me to speak freely, as our democracy empowers us to do so. There are many sick or rather unproductive hands that are offending the productivity, efficiency, and transparency of the civil service. These hands are riddled with the inability to reform. Reform requires their adaptability to transitions and innovation on a global growth level. I am not saying that the nation should achieve global growth at the expense of the laws set by our liberating forefathers. Their laws were then, and still are today, fair and just with relevance to the changing scenes in life. Rather, the civil service should grow in their interpretation and application of these laws. For instance, the laws on the rights of the employer to the employee remain valid and relevant today as they were in 1973. The only change is technology, research evidence, and competitive examples that are now available to help the service apply those laws to 2018 and beyond. Even trees grow. Trees don't travel, but they continuously grow generation after generation as the Creator engineered. Civil servants, we too are engineered by the Creator, and we must also grow. There is no ceiling to our growth, innovation, efficiency, or productivity. The only growth limits we have are our sick hands. Let us not limit ourselves to the destruction of the entire civil service body. I am not here to dictate what we should do as civil servants. There is no need for that. For as an each servant to all, there is that inner voice that knows the answer to the question, am I doing my optimal best to serve the Commonwealth of the Bahamas? He must be our brother's keeper. The John Doe is depending on us to best utilize his national insurance contributions in a manner that preserves a prosperous Bahamas for the future generations. John Doe's great-grandchildren deserve a better Bahamas. The grandchildren of our civil servants deserve a better Bahamas. Change in the public service can ignite change in our nation. Civil service reform has been a frequent and recent cry echoed among ministries, validated here today by earlier speakers. To take a cultural saying, if you have a donkey, ride it. Now only Jesus Christ took a donkey and manifested the glory of God the Father. But riding the donkey approach will not produce productivity and global professionalism levels in the public service. A donkey is slow and used to carry heavy, laborious burdens, not necessarily efficient, but rather working hard, not smart. The same 3-hour task of a donkey can be done in 30 minutes by utilizing the synergy of a horse and carriage. That must be why donkey race slow and horse race fast, eh? The resolution speaks to educated, qualified servants working in a timely and efficient fashion to attain productivity in a globally professional manner. Such productivity is not limited to any age bracket or years in service. By their fruits you will know them. Definitely said productivity is no donkey race. The donkey riding infrastructure that ignores utilizing existing resources proportional to civil service productivity and reform is destructive. Outsourcing external resources that are identical to in-house resources is destructive. Working outside the context of our national mandate is destructive. Working blinded to necessary interagency unison is destructive. Professionalism is a synergetic match of skill and productivity on a global level. To be a leader, one must be servant to all. Every civil servant is a leader of the population. In my department here in New Providence, there are over 300 servants to aid the quality of Bahamian life via preserving natural resources and regulating domestic operations in an environmentally sound manner. Numerically, this means for a population of over 300,000, each of these servants leads roughly 1,000 citizens in environmental, public awareness, and education. In the days of Moses, leaders were appointed to groups of thousands, hundreds, and fifties. Those Mosaic era leaders were chosen from men that produced good fruit. To allow a fruitless infrastructure to lead our population is destructive. Let us civil servants utilize the proven that possess the wherewithal to deliver efficient and effective services on the behalf of the government of the Bahamas. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. As many, the Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for the Ministry of the Environment and Housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Decades ago, Republican Senator Margaret H. opined, "My creed is that public service should be more than doing a job efficiently and honestly. It must be a complete dedication to the people and to the nation, fully recognizing that every human being is entitled to courtesy and consideration. That constructive criticism should not only be expected, but sought. That smears should not only be expected, but fought. That honor is to be earned, not bought." Mr. Speaker, if only the public service of our beloved country lived up to the noble aspirations of this quote. Instead, we are viewed as the complete opposite. Many believe we are inefficient, ineffective, and unskilled. Recall, popular Bahamian artist KB wrote an entire song about the negative way in which the public service is viewed. This is created by the actions and attitudes of the few bad apples among us. The negative is easy to believe. Shakespeare wrote, "The good men do is oft interred with their bones." I am here today to disabuse you of this false narrative. These perceived dry bones of our public service can live again. We have a rich history and a real legacy, painstakingly built on the backs of exemplary public servants like Dr. Kevin Bethel, Elmer Garraway, Idris Reed, James Catlin, Gail and Winston Saunders, and my personal favorite, Dame Doris Johnson. They were men and women of honor who personified what it meant to be a true public servant. They excelled and they propelled their government agencies to the next level. Firstly, let's establish that the public service is not a collection of concrete edifices. It is a microcosm of Bahamian society, and as such, a true reflection of the Bahamian populace. Secondly, in addition to our perceived challenges, we have real challenges. But thirdly, and most importantly, we are constantly changing and seeking ways to address these challenges. We are not perfect, nor do we profess to be. Mr. Speaker, some of our perceived challenges include corruption, lack of accountability, and being overstaffed. In April 2018, Prime Minister Minnis told reporters the Bahamas loses $200 million annually to corruption. Just last Monday, former Chamber of President Robert Myers, responding to the FDI consulting report that some contracts with the Ministry of Finance were not subject to public tendering, said that the Bahamians must demand accountability. They must demand higher standards from the public service, otherwise their financial well-being would be directly impacted. According to a May 2018 Tribune article, the bloated public service has been reduced by 6% since the May 2017 general election, and this has resulted in a cost savings of more than $75 million for the public service. The Department of Statistics has revealed that the Ministry of Labor's new Labor on the Blocks initiative has created over 1,000 jobs. And the Department of Statistics has found that for every 2 jobs lost in the public service, 1 new job has been created as a result of this program. So you see that it is positively contributing to our economy. This is your public service at work for you. Yeah. Other notable public service initiatives created to affect real change are the proposed Fiscal Responsibility Act, which would impose stringent controls on the government's fiscal operations, and similarly, a public procurement bill which is expected to transform procurement processes in the Bahamas, introducing historic levels of transparency and accountability that could curb corruption and boost investor confidence. I would be remiss if I did not mention my ministry's initiatives, the Ministry of the Environment and Housing's initiatives to protect our environment with stronger legislative reforms, such as our Department of Environment Planning and Protection Act, also our Ministry of the Environment Act. We have created initiatives to address our solid waste management challenges, such as the national ban on single-use plastic and styrofoam foodware. I know you have seen our commercial, our anti-littering campaign, Be a Hero, because it's all over the airways. Additionally, we have embarked on advancement in geospatial technology at the Bahamas National Geographic Information System Center. And of course, I must shout out the small but powerful forestry unit who are creating our national forest estate and also embarking on conducting our national forest inventory management assessments. Finally, our renewable energy reforms in the ministry I must shout out that we are solarizing the National Stadium. One of the most vexing challenges for the ministry has been the New Providence landfill. And as such, we have taken steps to privatize the landfill. When was the last time you heard of a fire at the dump? I'll wait. So once again, your Ministry of the Environment and Housing is working for you. Now let's knock on wood, just in case.
Let me knock with you.
James Baldwin admonished us that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. I encourage you to examine these facts and see that the public service is facing our challenges directly and crafting creative solutions. You servants, your actions should render the highest level of service. No longer should we be content with letting the few bad apples cheat the government, because they are essentially cheating your friends, family, and most importantly you, because remember, the public service is us. We, the committed public service workers, need to remind the bad apples that we have a legacy to uphold of being the best and the brightest. How many of you remember as adolescents that we were forced to repeat St. Jerome's poem, good, better, best? Never let it rest until your good is better and your better best. The best do not cheat the government. The best does their research. The best works hard. Overtime is not counted by the best. The best are no-nonsense driven public servants. They arrive at work early and they leave late. Wasteful spending and practices are non-existent. The best manage public resources as if they are private treasures. They do not watch the clock, cheat the man, and always, 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 they exemplify what it means to be a true professional. Mr. Speaker, I submit that while the public service is filled with skilled, creative thinkers, and while we have demonstrated that we are changing, we need to do more, especially since the bad apples are growing stronger, capitalizing of the loopholes in the system. I agree with Robert Myers' call for stronger legal reforms to overhaul public procurement throughout the public service, creation of an integrity commission, and a state sectors act, which would restrict ministers' meddling. Also, I strongly recommend the adoption of a 20-year dynamic, flexible, progressive plan for the public service. This should be crafted with input from every department. It must re-examine our vision, articulate our goals and objectives. It must address our deficiencies, capitalize on our strengths, and eliminate our weaknesses. Furthermore, it must promote viable and diverse forms of economic activity, encourage development of resilient infrastructure. Climate change is real, and Ragged Island happened. It must embrace opportunities for training and foster sustainable, innovative public policy formulation. This plan must lead to the creation of transparency across every sphere of the public service. This plan must also include metrics to evaluate its performance and success and realistic timelines for achieving our goals and objectives. The technical, human, and financial resources must be given to this plan by the public service. Lastly, we must be prepared to execute this plan as if our lives depended on it. Mr. Speaker, in order for us to reclaim our honor, meet the needs of our populace, conform to globally acceptable standards, and take the economy into the next century, change in the public service is not an option. It is a necessity. I humbly submit that incorporation of these changes in the public service will not only ignite change in our nation, but excel us to first world status. I support this resolution on behalf of the Ministry of the Environment and Housing. God bless those great constituents, and God continually bless the Isles of Perpetual Sunshine. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many. Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for the Ministry of Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, I rise by the grace of God on behalf of the diligent staff of the Ministry of Public Works to give my contribution to this debate. I acknowledge the Minister of Works, the Honourable T. Desmond Bannister, Permanent Secretary, Ms. Antoinette Thompson, Director of Public Works, Ms. Melanie Roach, past and acting directors of the Department of Physical Planning, Mr. Michael Major and Mr. Charles Zonopo. Mr. Speaker, we have been tasked today to analyze, to give commentary to, and to test the assertion that change in the public service can ignite change in our nation. Mr. Speaker, nationally, our education system has struggled with a seemingly unshakable D average exam rating. There has been an outcry from the business community that students are coming into the workforce unprepared to assume basic duties. Numeracy and literacy skills are challenged. This position has been reiterated by the Inter-American Development Bank's 2014 private sector assessment of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, our private sector has experienced modest growth dating back to 2001. During this period, there have been fluctuations, especially during the years of the Great Recession, the financial crisis that devastated economies globally. During this period, our economy actually contracted by 3% per year. According to the IDB's report of 2014, unemployment was pegged at 14.3% in the Bahamas, with the economy poised to grow by just over 1%. Most recent statistics show the unemployment rate hovering around 12%. Mr. Speaker, the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business report rated the Bahamas 76 out of 185 countries in 2013. The following year, our ranking dropped to 84 out of 189 countries, with the next review cycle seeing further decline. As of 2017, our ranking is 121st. And yet, Mr. Speaker, behind Canada and the U.S., the Bahamas stands as the third wealthiest nation in this Western Hemisphere with an average per capita income of $21,240. Mr. Speaker, the World Bank reports that the Bahamas has the economic structure in place to accommodate business development both locally and internationally. And no, Mr. Speaker, I'm not delving into the Ministry of Finance's portfolio, but simply laying the groundwork for where we are, where we find ourselves as a nation. Can change in the public service ignite change in our nation? Mr. Speaker, what is change? The public service is continually changing, it can be argued. But has it been good change? What has been the effect of public sector change? I was recently told that the private sector, with all of its complaints about the public sector, is not much better. So where do we look to ignite this change? Both sectors are living, breathing organisms. both deriving life, movement, and function from the individuals who make up the sectors. Mr. Speaker, who are these individuals? These individuals are drawn from the same pool, members of the communities that we call home. So is this where the change is needed? In our preamble, certain absolutes were espoused. But these statements must be examined to determine their veracity. Why? Because if we build on an unstable foundation and lie to ourselves, saying that it is firm, we conduct an exercise in futility, a waste of precious time and resources. Mr. Speaker, a brief Google search of the public sector reform in the Bahamas, and it was glaringly obvious, you have a problem. A problem, Mr. Speaker, with accountability, responsiveness, efficiency, and service delivery in general. So, Mr. Speaker, I took it a step further and conducted a simple survey of people who had recently engaged the service to conduct business, hoping against hope for a different result. The responses, Mr. Speaker, mirrored those revealed from my internet search. So no, unfortunately, we cannot claim professionalism or responsiveness or accountability or efficiency. But please, allow me to pause for a minute to say that the absence of proper service does not occur across the board at every agency. As a matter of fact, it has been proven time and again throughout the public service that there are gems that sparkle in the midst of the work environment in which they find themselves. And that, Mr. Speaker, is a part of the problem. We have glimmers of hope. We have these flashes of brilliance. We have these sparks of genius instead of full illumination. Mr. Speaker, Scripture admonishes us that they who judge themselves among themselves are not wise. This may seem like harsh criticism, but as I said, we cannot waste time and resources. Let us not make that mistake. Let us not presume that because we're okay, that those we serve are okay too. The public we serve must be our measuring stick. They must be our sounding board. If they are not pleased, then our service has missed the mark. And change in the public service ignite change in the nation. Mr. Speaker, to be fair, the present and past administrations of all sought in some way to address the issue of public service reform. The current Minister of Public Works, the Office of the Prime Minister, and indeed the service, has not allowed the assessment of the World Bank to go unnoticed or unchallenged. They have taken a proactive and pragmatic approach to fiscal reforms with the implementation of an IDB-sponsored initiative. The Prime Minister has taken the bull by the horns, Mr. Speaker, launching various initiatives to bring reform to the public service. These initiatives have been mentioned, but they include enhancing public sector effectiveness, supporting resilient infrastructure for growth, fostering an enabling environment for private sector competitiveness. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Works has embarked upon a blistering infrastructural improvement program with construction and refurbishment of bridges and roadways and seawalls in our family islands. They've strengthened the straw market and the bridge authorities, looking into the speed or lack thereof of processing building applications, actively pursuing avenues to significantly reduce the time that building applications, especially for commercial ventures, take to be reviewed by the ministry. Mr. Speaker, even review of application to conduct business are part of the mandate of the Ministry of Public Works. Through an initiative undertaken by the Office of the Prime Minister, this review process has been streamlined, and a pilot project launched in February is now ongoing. This project will reap generous time and therefore financial rewards for the public who require these services. Mr. Speaker, development planning is another area of review and reform being undertaken by this administration. The Planning and Subdivisions Act is under review to provide framework for development that is responsive and consistent with the environment in which we find ourselves as a nation. The revisions will also seek to provide legislation that actually supports enforcement of the Act. Comprehensive bylaws will be implemented to allow for faster development proposal processing. Mr. Speaker, can change in a public service ignite change in the nation? Yes, Mr. Speaker. The public service must take its place to foster building of the private sector and indeed the nation. But to do this, a realistic look must be taken regarding compensation for services expected. While the sacrifices of individuals to give back to the country of their birth is a common theme, and it is commendable, but Mr. Speaker, that don't pay bills. We must look at the brain drain taking place in our country. Individuals who have qualified themselves only to be offered minuscule salaries upon their return to this country. Mr. Speaker, we cannot delude ourselves into thinking that what we provide, what the service provides, is sufficient. Mr. Speaker, we must begin to continue to look outward. We must continually begin to look beyond where we are as a service, to the expectations of the people that we serve. So, Mr. Speaker, again, I support the resolution. And I'm saying thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. At this time, I would like to recognize in the gallery world and Olympic champion, Chris, the Fireman Brown. Really happy to have you with us. Thank you for joining us for the debate. As many, the chair recognizes the Honorable Member for the Ministry of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, all. Mr. Speaker, I rise and stand in firm awareness to support and affirm the resolution. A change in the public service can ignite a change in our nation. Allow me to remind my fellow ministers what is at stake here. I re-echo and speak the words from the preamble of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas Constitution, which states, and I quote, "We, the inheritors of and successors to this family of islands, recognizing the supremacy of God and believing in the fundamental rights and freedoms of the individual, do hereby proclaim in solemn praise the establishment of a free and democratic sovereign nation founded on spiritual values and in which no man, woman, or child shall ever be slave or bondsman to anyone." Unquote. Mr. Speaker, the role of my ministry is a multifaceted one, with its tentacles far-reaching and indeed very important in igniting change in our nation. I see my ministry's role as providing inspiration to a people on the precipice of change. This inspiration, Mr. Speaker, is one that gives people the permission and the energy to dream, but not only to dream, but to dream in such a way that it revolutionizes the island nation in the areas of trade, industry, infrastructure, culture, the arts, the sciences, and technology. You see, Mr. Speaker, it is my ministry, the Ministry of Education, that is the bedrock of transformation, the change which leads to national development. Without education as the engine driving this national development train, there can be no development worthy of true success. It's simple, because we must teach our people that there must be a coexistence between what God has given us, meaning the geography that we reside on, how we utilize its resources to bring a way of life for our people that reflects beauty, equity, growth, industry, and sustainability. This is the job of my ministry and its servants. The public servants at my ministry, Mr. Speaker, in order to deliver this Herculean task, must have certain qualities and values that undergird their behavior to the public. They must embody the words of Douglas Adams, an English author, who states, and I quote, "To give real service, you must add something which cannot be bought or measured with money, and that is sincerity and integrity," unquote. We must, Mr. Speaker, give hope to our people, to our nation, and to our land. Hope, Mr. Speaker, is the ignition that springs out of the depths of one's belief and faith, to know that what is deemed impossible can be made possible through the mere thought of belief. I can. It is our educational experiences that shape our desires, our passion, and our will to succeed at whatever we embark upon. Mr. Speaker, you see that the nation's very existence has to be one where an educated populace see the endless possibilities that are available to them through looking through a sea of potential surrounding them. My ministry has this arduous task of making people cognizant that with the right perception, the right mind, and the appropriate and necessary skills, and also, Mr. Speaker, a fundamental underlying precept built on guiding principles that can not only change our nation, but change the world. Our public servants must come to understand and be made aware of the words from the American Supreme Court Justice Randall Holmes Jr., and I quote, "Life is action and passion. Therefore, it is required of a man," I dare add, public servant, "that he should share the passion and the action of time at peril of being judged not to have lived," unquote. It is incumbent on every public servant to passionately serve and give to this effectively and efficiently. We must change the way we see, we do, we deliver, and we portray. We have to be careful how we alert and how we nurture people's innermost aspirations. You see, Mr. Speaker, it is education that underpins every profession, every dream, every inspiration, and every innovation. Mr. Speaker, as an additive to igniting a change in our nation, my ministry must be prepared to demonstrate the interconnectedness between information, discovery, data, and research as the driving forces and elements that bring about innovation and change. We must show our populace that there is a direct relationship between research and development, which brings about scientific re-engineering and innovation. It is this delicate harmony, Mr. Speaker, where our intellect, our imagination sit down together with our training and our perception while holding hands with our processes and technology to bring about discovery and paradigm shifts. Such qualities that create technical experts who manage the design data banks, who propose patent ideas, who are knowledgeable about intellectual property, and who are able to design and manage properties. Public servants who are sophisticated enough to comprehend that innovation in technology is merely scientific principles of mathematics and science at work. Mr. Speaker, it is only then that we demonstrate how a changed society with a changed people and a changed public service can definitely have an impact on changing our surroundings and ultimately our world. It was the American poet and philosopher Henry David Thoreau whom penned these words, and I quote, it is not enough to be busy or seem busy, I may add. The question is, what are we busy about? Mr. Speaker, my ministry takes its portfolio and responsibility very seriously. If there's to be any ignition of changing this nation, we realize that the world is ever changing, and the only constant in our world is change itself. We realize that we are working with outdated modalities, ways of doing, ways of knowing. We realize that our cultural norms, morals, and mores are all in a state of flux. We are ever cognizant that what makes us unique is constantly being called into questions as the lines of demarcation are challenging our very essence and the fabric of our society. It is us, Mr. Speaker, who have to get out and show our people that through celebrating what is truly ours, that is, our culture, our beliefs, our ways of being and doing, our art, our folklore, our music, our dance, our dishes, and our language are all what makes us uniquely and beautifully fashioned. These are the highest forms of humanity that we as a people have, which shapes our nation as a beacon to others in the region and the world at large. It is these elements, Mr. Speaker, that make my ministry considers as tools to ignite this change that will radically transform our Commonwealth. For this to happen, Mr. Speaker, our public servants must be dedicated to what they do. They must be true servants of the public. And more importantly, they must realize they must love what they do. It was the American musician Billy Cox who stated, and I quote, very emphatically, if you don't love what you do, you have two choices. You can either change what you are doing, or you can change what you love. I say, Mr. Speaker, let's change how we deliver. As the people, we focus and spend too much time and energies on conflicts and divisive forces. Mr. Speaker, for us to ignite change in our nation, we public servants must be conflict resolvers. We must rise to the occasion of excellence in our thoughts, behavior, and our attitudes. Honesty and trustworthiness must be enshrined in our actions. Let us remember that firstly, we must be made aware. that we can only give what we have. What we don't have, we cannot give. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Education must rise to the occasion of ensuring that our people remain competitive in a global arena. We must provide our people with the necessary tools and skills and education that will equip them to be competitive, not only within our country and the region, but internationally as well. We must embed in every one of our citizens the need to excel at whatever they choose to do. Mr. Speaker, my ministry and its civil servants must pause and reflect at times to examine from time to time how what we are delivering is affecting the change we want. How indeed is this shaping our nation as a whole? We must question our activities and our involvement in igniting this change. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we must protect our country and its citizens from the instability that is change itself. We must help our people navigate through changes through the services and institutions we provide for them. These services, Mr. Speaker, should empower our society to deal with natural catastrophes, economic downturns, and severe poverty and hopelessness. Combating these ills helps humanity to realize a purpose and help them to develop a plan and a roadmap for not just merely existing, but contributing meaningfully while enjoying a quality of life. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Member. It has been moved and seconded that the following resolution be agreed. Whereas over the years, the highly educated, trained, and skilled persons employed in the Bahamas Public Service have proven that they possess the wherewithal to deliver efficient and effective services on behalf of the government of the Bahamas, and whereas ensuring the government's obligations to its citizens and others are met in a timely fashion are among the duties and tasks performed and executed with high levels of professionalism by public officers, and whereas the government of the Bahamas, being fully cognizant of the need for public officers to remain responsible to the ever-present local and international demands for the timely delivery of government services, continues to implement its schedule of targeted reforms in key areas of the public services. Now, therefore, be it resolved that members assembled in this Parliament will has debated, change in the public service, how change in the public service can ignite change in our nation. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. The resolution has been agreed. On the adjournment, if I just may be allowed to make a personal departure, I want to state how much of a pleasure it was to be a part of this very historic landmark exercise. And although I did not have the opportunity to speak, I would very much like to, on the eve of my 15th anniversary to the public service on November 1st, I will celebrate 15 years of being a part of this wonderful organization, to celebrate the many public officers, in particular the permanent secretaries who would have poured into my life. I wanted to really recognize Mr. Harrison Thompson, Mrs. Leela Green, Mr. Archie Nairn, Mrs. Elma Garraway, Mr. Calvin Balfour, Mrs. Nicole Campbell, and my current permanent secretary, Her Excellency Miss Rhoda Jackson. And in particular, the directors of youth under whom I would have served, Mrs. Arthurine Turnquest, Mr. Gregory Butler would have served as acting director, and now the boss, Mr. K. Darren Turnquest. And the very special persons in my life, my fiance, who I will marry in approximately 6 weeks, Leading Woman Marine of 15 years to the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, Crystal Major, and our daughter Chastity, my mom, Ferron Knows, my dad, John Darwell, and this very special lady who sits in front of me, who's actually my aunt, Charmaine McKenzie, who has been my mentor. Over so many years. Fate would have it that even in this opportunity we would be allowed to share this chamber today. Thank you so much. And at this time I will entertain a motion for adjournment. As many.
Speaker, I rise to move that motion for adjournment.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the Honorable House upon its rising be adjourned sine die. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those opposed will stand. This Honorable House stands adjourned sine die.
Right.